Hi, my name is Dan Zeilinger, and I have been a world-traveling full-time trad jazz musician for the past 40 years. Some of my most memorable performances were on the lawn of the Edinburgh Castle, at Imperial Palace in Japan, as well as TV shows and commercials across the world. I've met many people during my career and have spent many hours on stage and off with these musicians, talking about jazz, life, and more. Some are touring musicians, some are theme park warriors, and some are casual musicians who play on the weekends with friends. I think they all have stories worthy of a movie script, and through these interviews, I'll be sharing them with you.
Sure.
Hi there, this is Dan Zeilinger for Trad Jazz Today, and my guest on this occasion is Mr. Eli Newberger, who is not only a brilliant tuba player, but happens to be one of the foremost experts in the field of pediatric medicine. And we'll get to that too, because little does he know we have a connection in that way. But that's a great, hi Eli.
Hey, pleased to meet you in this way, Dan. What a delight.
Now, when you were still with Black Eagles, and you guys were playing at the Sacramento Jazz Jubilee,
yeah,
out in that gigantic cavernous Freeway Gardens venue, which was that section underneath the gardens. I actually came up and introduced myself, and I think we went on after you, and that was kind of the only meeting we've really had. But I've been a longtime fan, and I wanted to tell you, I was telling my son that when you're a musician, a fan will come up to you if you play well, and they'll say, "Wow, that was really great. Have you ever heard?" And you're the guy they always quote when they come up to me, and they'll say, "Boy, Dan, that was pretty good. But have you ever heard Eli?" And
wow.
So if nothing else, you've haunted my career for 40 plus years. But you're a wonderful player, and I understand why.
Oh well, thank you, Dan. You're kind.
Okay, so yeah, I saw you when you were the band with Tony and the guys, and wow, I mean, just wonderful stuff. That was a fun band to watch. I don't know what it was like to be in, but it was a fun band to watch. Okay, let's start at the beginning with you here. I of course I have some. You sent me a couple of volumes of notes, which is good, and I do my own research on top of it. But you were born in Mount Vernon.
Actually, I was born in Brooklyn.
Oh, well, I've got to fix your bio here. I think Mount Vernon is what you claim as a hometown, though.
Yes, that's true. I moved to Mount Vernon with my family when I was 5 years old. I only have very dim memories of Brooklyn. But the thing about Mount Vernon that was so important to me, and it's one of the reasons why I really regard it as my hometown, was that after 1945, 46, when we moved there, when the important philosopher George Whitehead wrote his book, The Aims of Education, American public schools introduced the arts, and especially music, into the schools. And in Mount Vernon,
I apologize for coughing.
Oh, it's okay. In Mount Vernon, every school had a kit of band instruments. And anyway, I started playing the bass drum in the band of the Lincoln School, maybe in second grade. And when I was 10, the band director, whose main job was heading the football band at the big high school in Mount Vernon, but who had to cover this elementary school as part of his contract, says to me, "Eli, there's a tuba in the closet. How'd you both like to try playing it?" And anyway, it was love at first sight. And he, it turned out, was always looking for kids with enough heft to carry his sousaphone when they grew up and went to the high school. Anyway, it was one named Charles Randall. Everybody called him Doc Randall.
Okay.
And he was a wonderful fellow. And in Mount Vernon, they also had a summer band camp where at the high school, you could take lessons on instruments, and I took jazz piano, I took string bass, I took trombone, and then they had various ensembles. And so this guy would actually teach me during the summers as well while I was in junior high school, because I'd see him in the summer. And then when I got to the high school, this very guy said, when I was 14, he said, Eli, I'm a French horn player. He said, I've taught you all the tuba I can. You really ought to get some good lessons. And I said, that sounds like a nice idea. What do you think I should do? He said, well, there's this guy in New York. Don't let the fact that he plays would make you hesitate. He's supposed to be a wonderful fellow. His name is William Bell. Call the Philharmonic, get his phone number, give him a call, say you want to go play for him and ask if he teaches. So what did I know, right? Anyway,
Sure.
That was, the transforming tuba experience in my life. And it's why I could play 4/4 with the band that you heard in Freeway Gardens in Sacramento, because I was breathing through my nose after every beat, the circular breathing technique that Bell taught. For 3 years, I studied with him, and he was right next to me working on embouchure, making a beautiful sound, and especially breathing.
What was he like as a teacher? I mean, obviously he was effective, but how about as a person?
He was enormously warm and generous. He did not have that many students in New York. He, when I called him, it was, the whole thing is memorable. I remember the experience to this day. I took the sousaphone on the train from Mount Vernon to Grand Central Station. It was just about a 20-minute train ride. I had the sousaphone on my shoulder, walked over past Rockefeller Center to West 48th Street, and climbed up the 3 flights to his studio overlooking Music Alley. And I was expecting to find him, but I walked into this room and there were 3, 4, 5 tuba players who were hanging out there, which they did in between shows at Radio City Music Hall, the Opera.
Oh, how wonderful.
Which at the time was in Midtown Manhattan. The Philharmonic. All these people hung out there, right? And so Bell greeted me. He said, I walked in the room and we shook hands or something like that. He said, "Okay, kid, sit down over there and read what's on the music stand." So I sat down, and he was very friendly and warm. But this is what happened in the first encounter with Bell. So on the music stand was the trombone R band book, a book of exercises,
Sure.
Ending with Carnival of Venice and all of that stuff. I'd not seen that book before, but in order to sight read it, I had to transpose an octave down. Well, I'd been taking piano lessons. I was a pretty good reader. And so I was able to read it and, execute the few things that he wanted me to do. And, I played for maybe, 45 seconds. And Bell said, "Okay, that's enough." He said, "I'll teach you." He said, "It'll be $5 an hour." And
that was actually a piece of change at the time.
Well, actually, a friend of mine, both of whose parents were professional musicians, who lived in Mount Vernon, was a fine pianist, still a professor of piano at San Francisco Conservatory. But at the time, we were classmates, and he was paying $25 an hour to study with Seymour Lipkin, a fine pianist and teacher in New York. So, I knew what he was paying for lessons. Bell offering to teach me for $5 was,
Sure.
Yes, it's in today's money, it was more. It would be more, but this was really very generous. But he said, you've got to get rid of the sousaphone. He said, if you want to become a fine tuba player and study with me, you have to have a C tuba. It's got to be an upright instrument, and it has to have 4 valves. And at that point, I had never even seen such an instrument. And I said to him, "Mr. Bell, I'm grateful for your, listening to me and for offering to teach me. But there's no way that my school could obtain an instrument like this, I'm sure. And my family sure couldn't afford one." He said, "Well, don't worry about that." He said, "Next week, bring your mouthpiece and you can use one of mine." And Dan, for the next 3 years, I played a 4-valve con instrument that Bell owned. And, I mean, it was an act of tremendous generosity. And the lessons were just fabulous. He rarely played, but he would sit next to me, focus on making a beautiful sound, less about interpretation. I mean, he would say, well, you're taking piano lessons. And at the time, I was also taking piano, organ, and theory in the prep division at Juilliard.
I want to talk about that too, but go ahead.
So anyway, he said, we're working on making you a tuba player of professional quality. I mean, he would literally say that. And very frequently, there were other people in the room because they'd come in there and hang out while Bell was teaching. Subsequently, though, and you can get a sense of that from that interview that Carol Nowicki of the ITA, the International Tuba and Euphonium Association wrote, when Bell retired from the Philharmonic and went to Indiana University Conservatory as their first professor of tuba, there, and you can see that transcript, that he played favorites, he was impatient with people, he was drinking a lot, and that may have had something to do with it. But he was not, the person described in that interview, even though he was a great tuba player, a great teacher, attracted lots of students, mentored Harvey Phillips, his successor, it wasn't like that when I studied with him in New York.
Well, that's the reason I asked. His reputation isn't that of a woman-giving teacher,
Sadly, but in New York he was. And the people there loved him. The musicians loved him. He was a generous spirit. We went to New York for a little family reunion a year ago and made a pilgrimage to McSorley's pub, where he would hang out with the other tuba players. And they actually have a portrait of him over the table where they used to hang out at McSorley's. And, and I, every now and then I'll hear from one of the other people who would, drink beer with him at McSorley's. And in an act of generosity that you find in the tuba world, the horn that I play was owned by Walter Sear, who played with the Radio City Music Hall Orchestra and had a little walk-up studio across the street from Bell's, in which he sold musical instruments. He imported some. He sold some instruments that he had purchased and would resell. And anyway, I'm currently playing the instrument that Walter played. And out of the blue, I got an email a year ago from a tuba player whose name I didn't recognize, but who said, I understand that you've got Walter's horn. He said, I've got the mouthpiece for that instrument that was made by Luca Del Negro, who designed the horn in 1910 when he played with the predecessor orchestra to the New York Philharmonic. Would you like it? He says. I said, would I like it? So he sends me this mouthpiece that was made by Carl Muck, M-U-C-K, mouthpiece and instrument maker in New York, and it says Luca Del Negro on it. So, and he sent it to me. Would you like it? It wasn't a question of, if he offered to sell it to me, I would have purchased it. And lo and behold, it fits the tuba just beautifully.
Wow.
I mean, that was the ethic among tuba players in New York that Bell cultivated. And you can sense this now as we talk. We are colleagues in arms.
Oh, very
we
much
have
so.
all suffered the same realities of people looking down at their noses at us in a traditional jazz band when they'd rather have a string bass. Da-da, da-da, da-da.
Sure. Well, partially because of listening to you, I also play a lot of 4/4 when I'm allowed to.
Yes.
But I've actually carved away a living a lot of times, and I have to bow to whatever the band leader asks of me. But that's another story. I think it's interesting. Go ahead.
But tell me while you're at it, because this was a big issue in the Black Eagles, because I would hear 4/4.
Right.
And partly that's because I listened a lot to Louis Armstrong and the All-Stars, and people like Arnold Shaw, for example,
Sure.
who was the first bass player when I heard Armstrong Live. So I wanted to play 4/4, and the band, when we started, well, first I played piano for a year before switching to tuba.
I read that. Yeah.
Played in the English trad band tradition. Tony Pringle was from Liverpool, and that was the inspiration.
Right, the Nat Gonello bands in that era.
But my playing 4/4, I mean, the band grew into it, but this is what I heard, and that's what I wanted to do. But there have been other times when I've been asked to play gigs, like with Terry Waldo's band. One time I went to New York from Boston to play a gig at Grand Central Station in one of its many reopenings after refurbishing. And I played with Terry many times over the years. He came to Sacramento one year when Bob Pillsbury couldn't make the job. And but Terry, he wanted to only play 2/4.
Yeah. No, truth be known, I actually started as a trumpet player in this business, and was a big band lead player and played all kinds of different things. But
Oh, really?
I tried to make, as a tuba player, I just heard bass lines. It didn't matter if it was on tuba or string bass or bass
Right.
sax. Adrian Rollini is one of my big heroes stylistically.
Me too.
And so I just try to play what fits with what everybody else is playing. They're quite often that soloists, especially frontline guys, are playing things that work so much better with 4 than it does with 2, and depends on which piano player you've got and which banjo player you've got.
Yes.
It just depends on the moment in time. And jazz is supposed to be a dialogue between at the moment in time.
Yes. Well said.
At least that's my take on it.
Yeah, I agree.
I think it's really kind of interesting that your heart is in Mount Vernon, considering anybody who plays the brass instruments has a connection to Mount Vernon, New York, of course, because of the Bach connection.
Yeah, well, actually, the mouthpiece that I was playing while I studied with Bell, and actually that I played until about 5 years ago, was a 24AW that I bought at the Bach factory when in junior high school we had a school trip to the Bach factory. And they offered us, we went to the store and they said, we'll give you 10% discount or something like that. And at that point, where I was playing a King sousaphone with a King mouthpiece, I switched to the Bach 24AW and used it for decades afterward.
That's a good mouthpiece.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's still a good mouthpiece to recommend. A lot of young players get stuck on very small mouthpieces as tuba players, and it ruins the sound. Anyway, sir, that's really interesting. Because that's one of the things I was going to bring up in our interview, was that I find it, and I don't mean this with any disrespect to the trad community, but the fact that you were voted the best trad tuba player for years and years and years in different polls. And truth be known, neither you or I are really what would be considered trad tuba players in our style,
Well, I don't know about that.
I'm not saying we're necessarily beboppers or progressive, and like we were talking about, we do what a string bass player would do on occasion. But I'm just saying that when people picture trad tuba, they're picturing Lammy, or they're picturing, the guys that came out of the Waters revival, which is pretty strict 2-beat stuff.
Well, I mean, yes, but when you go to New Orleans, and I played a lot in New Orleans, the bands, well, first of all, the tuba in New Orleans jazz, as I've seen it, has transformed over the years. Arguably, in the trad contemporary time, it was Alan Jaffe who, with his wife, owned Preservation Hall, organized that tradition. And, he wasn't a great technician. He played 2/4, but he really respected a 4/4 sound. And the drummers that he played with, Cy Frazier, notably, was a 4/4 drummer, fabulous drummer. Sure. So the sensibility in New Orleans wasn't necessarily just the parades, where 2/4 would typically be played. And when I played in New Orleans, I mean, I was doing, we played there for the New Orleans Jazz Club. We would have club dates. We played jazz. We played the second Jazz Fest in 1971. And actually got a review in the New York Times that sort of put the Black Eagles on the map and got us lots of gigs. John Wilson reviewed us. And actually, Wilson was a guy who really liked John S. Wilson, who wrote books on jazz, including the history of jazz. He was a real fan of what we would call traditional New Orleans jazz today. And a lot of what he liked was more 4/4. Rollini, for example, played 2/4 beautifully, but his 4/4 playing was elegant as well.
Right. Of course, the modern players down there now have progressed into what would be considered funk or more Afro-Cuban feels. One of my first interviews for this show was Matt Perrine.
Yes.
And of course, by the way, he says hello. And
oh, thank you. He's a wonderful fellow.
He's the one who really. Yeah, he's the one who really said you got to get Eli. Anyway.
Well, Matt he grew up in Sacramento playing with a youth band, and I've got a picture of him and me at a Tuba-rama, when they pull tuba players together. And Matt was about 13 at the time, and he's a lovely guy and a great player. Great string bass player as well. Yeah,
and I think he kind of epitomizes what current New Orleans tuba players are doing as far as styles, and he's the workingest guy down there right now. Him and Jason Jerzak, I guess, are doing a lot of it. But yeah, so that's I agree with you totally. I was surprised to hear that you started with the Black Eagles on piano. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, well, what happened was, when I started to play jazz.
I'm sorry.
It was
Let's go ahead and back up, because how did you go from taking lessons with Bell to playing jazz? He must not have been happy if he knew about that.
No, to the contrary, he was.
Okay.
And I'll tell you, and in fact, I had two contrasting experiences in that time while I was in high school. One, a very negative one about playing jazz, and that was because I was taking organ lessons as well as piano and theory at Juilliard. And my mother would drive down on Thursday afternoon so I could take organ lessons at a church in the East 80s in New York, where Bronson Reagan would teach his private students. And often, because I couldn't practice on a pipe organ in Mount Vernon, he would give me an hour to practice in the church itself prior to giving me my lesson. And one day while I was practicing whatever the Bach, trio sonata or something, I was enchanted by the sound, and I started to play a blues. And suddenly he rushed in. He said, "You cannot play that music here." And I said, "Gee, I'm sorry." And then I went back to playing Bach or whatever it was. With Bell, however, sometimes if Bell was teaching somebody else, he would have me walk up a flight where there was some little closet type practice rooms, and would sit me in the practice room. He said, "Why don't you just, work here, and I'll tap on the door when we're ready to have your lesson." So one day I was there and I was just improvising jazz, and he tapped on the. He said, "Eli, that's fantastic. You can play jazz." So he was encouraging. But at the time, I was leading the high school quote unquote Dixieland band, the Davis Dixie Band, which famously won the Ted Mack Amateur Hour and played in Grand Central or in Madison Square Garden. And
I'm sorry. I'm just saying, I saw that you listed the Ted Mack Amateur Hour, and it's interesting because Tom Kubas, who's a big West Coast arranger and actually started out as a George Probert devotee, also did Ted Mack, and so did Bill Dendle of the Sacramento Jazz Camp.
Oh, yes, I know Bill. Yes.
Yeah, all three of you guys went through the Ted Mack experience.
Oh, that's really interesting. I'm in touch with Bill and Shelley, his wife, all the time, but I didn't know about the Ted Mack Amateur Hour connection. That's fabulous.
Yeah, in fact, he did one of the funnier interviews I've done so far. You should look it up when you have a chance.
Oh, I will. Yeah. Oh, that's so great. Wonderful. But anyway, Bell was very supportive, but I was playing piano as the leader of this high school Dixieland band. And interestingly, on the Ted Mack Amateur Hour, we were on with that band with me on piano, but my brother Henry succeeded me as the band leader when I went off to college. And they went on Ted Mack Amateur Hour and they won all the way up to the finals. But when they got to Madison Square Garden, for whatever reason, they didn't have a bass player. So he called me in New Haven and asked, can you come down and play with us at Madison Square Garden? And so there's this video of us playing Tiger Rag that somebody found, and I put it on YouTube, on my YouTube channel. And it's pretty good, actually. But there, I schlepped all the way down from New Haven with a tuba joiner. But I've been playing piano, and what happened was when I was a freshman at Yale, by happy chance on the old campus, I met a guy named Fred Starr, and we organized with a banjo player also from Cincinnati named Dudley Taft, a little band that we called the Tin Rainbow Jazz Band. And I played piano and tuba with that band. And that was the first time that I really started to play a fair amount of tuba rather than piano. But when we made our recording, I played both tuba and piano, a recording called Eye Openers on Toad Records that came out in 1961. But by then, I was a tuba player. But then when I met, and what happened, I can tell you how the Black Eagles got organized because that's part of the story.
Okay, please do.
Okay, so what happened with the Black Eagles? This is a strange but lovely set of circumstances. So through my undergraduate years, I played with the Tin Rainbow Jazz Band. And we got, a lot of college dates around in New England. We were asked to make this recording as well. And then when I graduated and went to Yale Medical School, Carolyn and I got a terrific gig, for want of a better way to put it.
Oh, sure.
Which was being the resident directors of the International House across from the Divinity School up on Prospect Street in New Haven. And so I was going to medical school. I was playing tuba with the New Haven Symphony. And so I was still active as a tuba player, and then would get various pickup jobs, like when the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus came to town.
I did the circus for a while, yeah.
Okay, so a great gig with the tuba because the band was right down there. You were 10 feet away from the elephants walking by. I mean, it was a dream gig.
People don't tell me. I'm sorry. I was just going to say people don't believe me when I tell them that the big cats smell much worse than the elephants. Anyway.
Oh yeah, right. True to say. But anyway, so here we were in the International House, and we had 22 foreign students living with us each year. Lovely folks, and we really, we basically got an apartment in return for helping unquote these quite sophisticated young people adapt to the rigors of life in New Haven. I mean, it was a dream gig, and we enjoyed it mightily. And we organized in our basement a little coffee house, and we would buy. And we did this with the other students in the house, and one of whom was an architectural student, and designed this little loft in this large room that had an old upright piano in it. And there, I played piano, and we would ask musicians from New Haven to come and jam. And it became a place where a lot of, fairly good players, Lou Pontecorvo was a very fine jazz and classical player, was a regular. Larry Gushy, a jazz scholar at the time, was a graduate student at Yale. He would come in and play clarinet with us. Sammy Remington, the clarinetist, who an English clarinetist, when he would tour, Sammy would come in. And, you know, so it became a place in New England where people could jam on Friday nights. And it was just a lovely scene. Well, what happened was after Carolyn and I left New Haven to go to West Africa, where I was a Peace Corps doctor. And the parenthetical backstory of that is that living with the foreign students for those 3 years instilled in both of us a strong antipathy to the Vietnam War. And the year that I graduated from medical school, 1966, in the Johnson administration, as the troop levels in Vietnam were up to 1.5 million American soldiers, they didn't have enough physicians to support the war effort. So they imposed a doctor draft, and all male graduates had to sign up with one of the uniformed services. And one of the options was to apply for a public health service commission and be detailed, say, to the National Institutes of Health or the Centers for Disease Control, or you could get detailed to the Peace Corps. And I'd been a music theory major and had done an honors project on the development of jazz piano style with Mel Powell, who was a professor at the music school, who had been a professor of composition, but he played with Benny Goodman when he was a teenager, brilliant pianist. Anyway, we asked for and got a West African assignment. I just want to mention, apropos of COVID, current news, you said you want to keep COVID out of these discussions, but also one of those draft obligated physicians in the class of 1966 who applied for a public health service commission was Tony Fauci. So Fauci and I are exactly the same age. And also when we went to West Africa, my job was to provide the public health support for a maternal and child health program. Okay. And that also led to my coming to Boston in pediatrics. But here's what happened in Africa. One day in the mail, there arrived a copy of the New Haven Register, a clipping from the New Haven Register that mentioned the band that I had started at the International House that was now playing with a New Orleans clarinetist who was a Harvard undergraduate, Tommy Sancton. And he was like a sophomore or something like that. Well, it was described as a brilliant clarinetist, and the band had changed its name to the Galvanized Washboard Band. And it was really a good band. Anyway, so this guy in New Haven, who was an old friend of mine, Hub McDonald was his name, banjo player, sent this to me in Africa. So when Carolyn and I arrived in Boston in 1969, after the 2 years in the Peace Corps, I looked up Tommy, called him up, and introduced myself. He said, "Oh yeah, I heard of you at the International House. And you know, it's funny that you could call because there's an English trumpet player, Tony Pringle, who's just moved to town. And we ought to start a band." That was how the Black Eagles got started.
Wow. I mean, Tony I mean, he's one of the reasons the band got so famous. He was so unique in his approach.
Yeah, absolutely. That was Tony's inspiration. It was Tommy's inspiration. I like to think that part of it was my inspiration as well. Also in that band, when I was playing piano, we started without a bass, and I would hammer out four lines.
Well, it's good enough for Louis Armstrong. I mean, why not, you know? With
seriously.
With the hot five.
Absolutely, so. The hot five, correct. Right. And there was a very strong influence of the English trad revival, and all of us wanted to hit material that was infrequently recorded. And so there was a kind of scholarly, it wasn't intellectual, it was curiosity about the Owens rare recordings. And so for the next 31 years, I played piano for 1 year, and then switched to tuba after finding Bob Pillsbury on a pickup job, went back to the band after we played this job at the Manchester Yacht Club and said, "I found a piano player who's much better than me. Let me switch to tuba. We'll give him a shot at a gig." So we did, and it worked like magic. So Pillsbury joined the band in 1971. And then I thought,
we're breaking up just a little bit here. I'm not sure why, but
that's how it happened that
our signal's breaking up just a little bit. I'm not sure why. I mean, it's fine. Now it's
I
fine.
don't, okay, I think from to the extent that I can tell, I've got a strong signal on
Okay.
this end. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, having that influence of the English players, I'm sure you ended up doing some temperate seven stuff and things like My Old Man Said
Absolutely.
Fall to the Van and
Yeah. And then the other thing is where, because Tony was had many connections in England, beginning around 1978, partly because our records were selling in England, we'd started to get invited to jazz festivals in England. So we played the Brecon Festival in Wales, the Edinburgh Festival in Scotland, like for 8
that's
years,
a wonderful
9 years
festival.
running. Yeah, and we'd meet a lot of the old traditional jazz players. You know, it was really
Did you know
wonderful.
Did you know Mart Rogers and Manchester Jazz? Those guys?
No,
It's okay.
I
I'm
don't remember that.
just
Yeah.
throwing a name out there. He was one of my connections in the area.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
No problem. So yeah, I love those. I love Edinburgh's. I think Edinburgh is honestly one of my favorite cities in the world. It's just
It is wonderful. Yeah, a lovely, lovely place. And of course, the 3 weeks at the end of the summer, it's a 24-hour-a-day cultural riot.
oh yeah,
we
the
would
Fringe
often,
Fest and everything. Yeah.
yeah, well, the jazz festival was on the Fringe, but sometimes there would be events where the two festivals would join. And like once we played in Usher Hall, the big performance venue with the Scottish National Orchestra. We had these orchestral arrangements that we originally did with the Boston Pops. And that was a
Yeah.
really
Oh, it's
good
wonderful.
experience.
Okay, so when did it go from being the Black Eagles to the new Black Eagles, and how did that happen?
Well, that was what happened when Pillsbury joined the band. We played for the first year, actually directly borrowing the name of this early New Orleans band, the Black Eagle Jazz Band. And when Pillsbury joined the band, we switched the name. When Pillsbury joined and I switched to Tuba, we switched the name to New Black Eagle Jazz Band.
I thought it may have ended up being two parallel bands at some point in time.
Well, actually, toward the end of my tenure with the band, for some reason or another, some of our recordings got listed as Black Eagle Jazz Band as opposed to New Black Eagle Jazz, but the official name, people would hire us as the New Black Eagle Jazz Band.
Really interesting. You know, I had made a comment early on in our interview that there was kind of a connection between us and your pediatrics. My wife happens to be a mover and shaker in the NICU community on the West Coast here.
In the which community? Which
in West
community?
Coast, neonatal.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, that's great.
She was on the team for the first ECMO experiments and that kind of stuff.
Oh, really? Wow. And ECMO, of course, is in the news these days with people in intensive care. Wow.
So when I told her
Good
I had
work.
I had you on there, she said, "Oh, cool," you know.
Well, good. Well, say hello to her for me. Thank you.
Absolutely. So now you're the Black Eagles ran its course, but they had a good run.
Well, actually, they're still playing. Billy Novick now leads the band. Stan Vincent is still their trombone player, and everybody else. I mean, the style is totally different.
I was going to say, who could step into your shoes? I can't think of anybody who could step into your shoes stylistically.
No, they used a variety of string bass players after I left the band.
I understand. What can you say? So now you have several groups that you're gigging around with.
Well, one principal group, and it's a wonderful group of guys. I mean, we're not playing now, I regret to say, but we have a steady gig at Ristorante Primavera in Millis, Massachusetts. It's the third Thursday of every month at 7:30, and we get a very nice listening crowd, and it's a wonderful group. I'm the only non-full-time professional in the band, so it's from guys around the Boston area, 4 of whom have Berklee College of Music connections.
Well, I've watched I've watched a few of the videos, and it looks like just an absolute blast. It looks like a lot of fun.
Oh, it's wonderful, wonderful players with the great sense of humor, and people love the ensemble improvising. That's the key. We've got to keep that tradition alive.
You know, you're really interesting and pretty exclusive in that. You got to hang out with tuba players early on, because most of us, of course, we don't get to hang out that much because we're all individuals in bands and other than musicians lounges and maybe a bar underneath the piano. I'm just kidding. We don't really have a chance to make friends with other tuba players often, and so that's really a rarefied thing, you know. And then
Well,
go ahead.
but don't you find, Dan, that there is a real sense of brotherhood among tuba players?
Just from
In
lugging
the
it
first place,
around.
well, there's that, but also we have certain common experiences. Perhaps most importantly, that you don't find the tuba finds you.
Very much so.
And you know, so we all have those initial life experiences, but we all have this struggle to get beyond how other people look at us as a kind of joke.
Yeah.
In whatever music setting, including the great players and the great symphony orchestras. And there's a spirit of generosity, and actually a lot of that I think goes back to Bill Bell, because in the 60s in the East Coast and in the middle of the country, Arnold Jacobs, who played with the Chicago Symphony, another warm and generous man who had a group of terrific tuba players around him. And then on the West Coast, his student Floyd Cooley.
Sure.
And Floyd would come to Sacramento fairly frequently. And one time, the Black Eagles we flew to the West Coast for a single gig in San Jose for a local jazz club. And my tuba got damaged in transit, and one of the valves wouldn't depress.
I've been
and
through
I
that,
couldn't
yeah.
play. So I didn't know what to do. So I called Floyd in San Francisco. He said, "Eli, I'm off tonight. I'll come up. I'll bring my tuba. You can use my horn, and then I'll drive back to San Francisco."
Wonderful.
So, you know, where else in the world can you call in a favor like that? It was, you know, and it was a high point of my life. And he stayed there and listened all night and enjoyed it. And then I saw him the next spring in Sacramento. You know, it was just terrific.
Oh, it's true. It's true. You know, although I said I started out as a trumpet player, my father was a sousaphone player at the University of Nebraska.
Oh, really?
And so he was very happy when I made the switch. But
Oh, wonderful.
so
Wow,
it's interesting.
terrific.
Yeah. Well, you know, you were talking about how we kind of maligned musicians, and it's true. You know, I have some really excellent tuba players that are friends of mine and coming on the show. Of John Van Houten, who's one of the premier studio players out here now. And actually, he and I met when I was playing cornet on a Lou Waters style band, and he was playing tuba back when we were kids.
Oh, wonderful.
But that's not what I want this to bring us to. The other maligned instrument, and I was buddied up with a plectrum banjo player named Brad Roth for about 9 years, and we did bands together and solos and the banjo rama and all that stuff. And you have the same kind of relationship with Jimmy Massey.
Yes, exactly. And of course, Jimmy is, I mean, there's no one in the world like Jimmy. Self-taught, both as a singer and as a banjo player. There's a stamp of authenticity and originality.
Oh, unbelievable. Yeah.
The way he voices chords just make your heartstrings vibrate. And he's a brilliant singer and a lovely guy. And our, you know, relationship goes back to, it was really something. I mean, we would play the odd gig together until the early 80s. And anyway, this strange, I mean, I was playing often with the Black Eagles. I mean, back then I was playing 3-4 gigs a week while doing my job at Children's Hospital. And in the town of Brookline where we lived, there was a program in the adult education division of the education department in which people would have concerts in their homes, and the city or the town would provide cheese and wine, and you know, it was lovely. And we had a big living room, and the head of this program one day, after we'd had a brass quintet, a string quartet play, he said, "Eli," "I'd like to do a recording with you and Jimmy." Not a recording. He said, "I'd like to have a concert with you and Jimmy Massey. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Well, I know Jimmy. You know, from time to time we've played together. What do you have in mind?" And he said, "Well, you know, we can only offer you $50, but you put a concert together and we'll bring in the people and the chairs and the cheese and what have you. So before calling Jimmy about the gig, I called Bob Erdas, the president of Stomp Off Records, for whom the Black Eagles had previously recorded a lot. And I said, Bob, I have this curious concert coming up with Jimmy Mazzy. It'll be in our living room. And I was wondering whether, you might be interested to record it. He said, yeah. He said, I'll be there. He said, and I'll give you each 300 records, which we could sell at gigs. We were very generous. So I called Jimmy. I hadn't spoken to Jimmy, and I said, Jimmy, I've got this offer for a gig in our living room. And it only pays $50, but it would come with 300 Stomp Off records because Bob Erdas wants to record it. And Jimmy said, are you kidding? Of course. So what happened was we did this recording, and and also Jimmy has this wonderful didactic impulse. So we worked up a variety of songs. We got together, on an afternoon, and and Erdas always wanted rarities, and Jimmy, of course, was a huge number. And so, Dapper Dan from Disneyland and from Dixieland and, stuff like that.
Sure.
And Moaners and what have you. And then we're there, right? And Jimmy says to me, he said, Eli, Shake It Down? And I said, no. He said, well, that's okay. He said, I'll start it. Mind you, we're recording with 50 people, and we told them to hold the applause, and a professional, recording engineer in another room with headphones and stuff like that. And Erdos was there as well. So Jimmy goes into to Shake It Down, and I listened to the first chorus, and the chords are pretty straightforward. So then we played it, and ultimately we called the LP Shake It Down. Well, also on the LP, there's this version of the Gershwin C-sharp minor prelude.
I was going to talk about that because I've seen that video, and it makes sense that I know you started on piano.
Well, no, but you know what happened? Our daughter was taking piano lessons, and she had this manuscript on the piano. And I sat down one day, and I was just I can play piano well enough to work through. The other two preludes are technically over my pay grade, but this one was pretty simple. But I figured, well, I could play the right hand part, da 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 da,
beautiful melody,
da 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 on the tuba. So and the left hand is like mainly 10th, so I could do that. The big technical problem was that it's in C-sharp minor. But anyway, so that night on a lark, I figured, well, I'll play this for the crowd. And Erdas insisted on putting it on the CD. So it was an LP, right? And anyway, so that's how that recording and that tune came to be recorded. He sent it to John S. Wilson at the New York Times, and Wilson gave that a Sunday New York Times review, along with other Stomp Off records, but with my picture playing the tuba in the Sunday Times. And this was really pretty, pretty unusual. But also he remarked on how this was a lovely and unaffected performance of the Gershwin. Well, this got me and me all kinds of work in Europe and the United States because of that review and the word getting around. And I actually got invited to jazz parties around the country, mainly to perform that piano and tuba duet.
That's really wonderful and funny.
Duet. Ridiculous. And then in this concert, I did it when it was being videotaped. So you saw that on YouTube.
Well, it's a great thing. Those preludes aren't well known to the general public. And they're wonderful pieces. And that melody is so haunting,
Oh.
So good for you.
Yeah, it's basically a minor blues.
Oh, we're cutting up again. Our signal is maybe it's my.
I saw that. Yeah.
That's okay. I can still see the tuba in your garden. So we're.
Yeah, that's great. Glad you can see it.
We talked about that before we actually started taping. So why don't you tell the people about your garden real quickly here?
Oh, so this is our garden, and we right now have more cucumbers than we can eat. The green beans are coming out. We had the first cherry tomatoes of the season yesterday, and in the garden there are two. I think I can show you. There are two tuba bells, one in the far distance, and those tuba bells came from Manhattan on West 48th Street from the sub-basement of one of the music stores where they had, musical instrument, old molding cases and whatever else. And, I'm a high school kid, right? So they were selling them for like $5 each. So on respective weeks, I carried these two bells back to my family's house in Mount Vernon, and then brought them to New Haven and stored them while Carolyn and I were in Africa, and then brought them to Boston. And so they were in our backyard in Brookline for the 44 years that we lived there. And when we moved here full time 2 years ago and built that garden, we put them in the garden. And they also face the street over a little wall. So people, when they come by, know there's a tuba player living here and get a kick out.
As long as it doesn't scare away the birds, you're okay, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really wonderful. Oh gosh, I can't think of his name now. He was the longtime tuba player and leader of the Disneyland band, Stan Freeze.
No, I mean, I know his name, but
he has a tree in his front yard that he hangs sousaphones from.
Oh, really?
It's like a giant, I guess he's just collected them over the years. It looks like a misspent Christmas tree. Anyway, so it kind of reminded me of that. This has been really lots of fun, Eli. I'm curious to ask you more, but I think your dog needs your attention. But at some point, I would love to do another interview and talk to you how your two disciplines, what you've noticed, because since the book that you published, or most well-known book, is about boys and the men they become. You must have some really interesting observations about your Dixieland colleagues in relation to those things.
Yeah, well, they were important to talk about in the book, but also I just wanted to mention, I'd love to do another interview, but I did write a chapter in a book that was edited by a professor of medical humanities at Yale, about doctors with two careers. It's called Doctors Afield. But in that book, there's a chapter called Medicine of the Tuba, in which I talk about the tuba in relation to my medical work. And so if people are interested, they could just go to my website.
Well, I certainly am, yeah.
Yeah, and under my musical publications, there's that Medicine of the Tuba, because I could not have done my day gig, could not have put up with the emotional rigors of that work if I didn't have the jazz gigs. And the band started its regular Thursday night gig at the Sticky Wicket Pub in Hopkinton in 1971, just as I organized my outpatient clinic. And I go from those difficult hours in the clinic directly to Hopkinton, pick up my tuba and play the job and enter a whole different world that was curative for me. And I sort of write about how that intersected, including what the sound of the band was from the tuba chair and how it rinsed from my mind all of those anxieties.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'll make sure to personally look that up, but I want you also to plug your entire website and places where people can read your writings and listen to your music. So you basically got as much time as you want to right here to plug whatever you'd like to plug. Where are you appearing? Where can they find your music recordings? What books do you have out that you'd like to have purchased?
Well, sure. I mean, it's just EliNewberger.com, EliNewberger.com. And it's got links to recordings. It's got a lot of the things that I've written, both on music and in medicine and in archives, so to speak. And it's got a lot of the reviews of my records and a lot about the band that I play with, and then links to gigs, in case people want to know where I'm playing. And then contact information. People can always reach me at enewberger@gmail.com.
Well,
And so, I'm around. I'm still active,
oh, absolutely.
except for now where we're quarantined at home.
Well, nobody's playing at the moment. I mean, I've done a couple of distanced concerts for some of the local jazz societies, but it's not the same as having the musicians on stage with you. It's much like you're speaking about the brotherhood of tuba players. There's a synergy that happens with people face to face that doesn't happen digitally.
Absolutely, it's so true. It's like going to concerts, a live concert as opposed to, and there's some wonderful players who are putting up, daily videos in this time of hardship, but it's not the same as a live gig.
Well, sir, it's been a pleasure. I can testify to the fact that not only are you easily accessible, because I think I reached you through your website for this interview, but God, it's just been a delight, Eli. I'm so glad we've had a chance to get to know each other a little bit better.
Well, I'm thrilled, Dan. And now we got to look forward to meeting in person. Where are you located now?
I'm actually in California, in Southern California. I live in the shadow of Disneyland, actually.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
I'm in Anaheim, and so I'm in the hotbed of a lot of really great players. And so we're all out here fighting it out,
Oh, and the players are not working. It's really a problem, particularly in the gig world.
Well, it's been great, this series of interviews. I just started, in fact, about a month ago. And it's been wonderful to reconnect with people and give musicians a chance to speak their mind, especially us tuba and banjo players who don't get a voice very often. And it's been a lot of fun. Check out some of the interviews I've done. I've done things with Lee Floyd. And,
wonderful.
And I've got all kinds of people that I've interviewed. So
that's terrific. Have you interviewed Jim Self? Do you know Jim?
Yeah, no, not yet. Not yet. He's
a terrific guy, and the Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and he's John Williams's favorite recording, tuba player and stuff. I mean, he's a brilliant player and a lovely guy, and he plays jazz too.
Well, see, that I didn't know.
And what's more, has a dog that sings. He's a basset hound that sings on one of his recordings. But you'd find him a kindred spirit.
The Basset Hound Blues. I can't wait to hear that.
Yeah.
Well, I'll see if I can get in contact with him and say that you recommended him, and we'll see how this works.
Lovely. Well,
all right, Eli.
Thank you.
It's been wonderful. You take care and make sure to give your love to all of the people close to you, including your puppy. And hopefully we'll speak again soon.
Wonderful. I'll tell Jimmy too that you spoke so
absolutely.
well.
I don't know if he would be up for an interview, but that would be wonderful also.
Well, I'll send you his email so you can.
Thank you. That would be great.
And his phone.
Wonderful. All right, Eli, you take care now.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for watching Trad Jazz Today. Dan shows new interviews every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Make sure to check out the archive of past shows, and please give us a thumbs up when you subscribe to the channel. Bye.